Hey guys, welcome to Relaxation Book Club. I'm Jonathan,
And I'm Bella.
and we're going to be talking today about Of Mice and Men. So, first of all, to get started, let's talk about a little bit of the background of Mice and Men. It was a book written by John Steinbeck, 1936. It was taking place right in the heat of the Great Depression. Themes of the story, it talks a lot about the American dream or the farce of the American dream. So, during the Great Depression, this was a very hard time to be a worker, obviously. We all know a little bit about the history. They teach us a little bit about this in school, the Great Dust Bowl, all those things. But even particularly talking about George and Lenny being farm hands, this is also during a time of technological advance where there were less required workers on such a farm, and wages were actually compressed because of that. There was less jobs and more people trying to get these jobs. I'm going to pass it over to Bella, who's going to talk about the author.
I mean, there's plenty to say on John Steinbeck, and I think we'll get more into him when we go over the Grapes of Wrath eventually, because obviously that's his nominal work. If you know John Steinbeck, it's the Grapes of Wrath. But for a little bit of backstory, he was born early 1900s. I want to say it's 1906. He was raised in Southern California, grew up there, and you kind of get his love for California through his scene setting. A lot of times he'll talk about how the sun hits, like, the hills or, like, reflects off the river of Soledad. And you can really tell, like, that's something he saw and really appreciates. So that's why I think four of his works are in, like, Southern California. He has a hard love for Southern California. But Of Mice and Men is not his, like, first piece of work. So yeah, John Steinbeck's first novel was Cup of Gold. He wrote that after, he moved to New York for like 5 years and was a journalist, then moved back to California and wrote Cup of Gold. And I'm not sure if we're getting into that one. If this book club's as long lived as I want it to be, we'll read Cup of Gold. But it's not on our immediate list right now.
We already have books planned out till next year at our current pace that we're going, so stick around.
I'm hoping we get fast enough that we can do a few bonus works, because there's some works I'm like, I really want to do like this month, but we can't get to because our schedule's set. He wrote Cup of Gold. That was I want to say 29, like 7 years before Of Mice and Men. Between that time, he writes 3 more books, and he wrote Of Mice and Men during his preparatory work for The Grapes of Wrath. So, Of Mice and Men was 1936, The Grapes of Wrath was 1937. And we'll go more into his preparatory work for The Grapes of Wrath, obviously, when we do Grapes of Wrath, because it's kind of interesting how he gets into the, specifics of migrant workers.
I actually don't know anything about Grapes of Wrath, so I will be excited to learn more about it myself.
That's a decent bit of background on John Steinbeck himself, and of course the cultural set piece that Of Mice and Men takes place in. This is just a sidebar before we start. I think the original title, the original title for Of Mice and Men was Something That Happened, which I think is a very funny title for a book, and he should have went with it. Now, with that said,
do you know why he chose Of Mice and Men instead? Do you know
my assumption is he found the poem it's from and went, oh yeah, that's a cute little allusion. Because I think the point of naming Of Mice and Men weirdly like this is like, so it doesn't tell you what happens in the book. You're just supposed to like read it. Because obviously the first publication doesn't come with the poem it came from written in the front, like a lot of like later publications come from, so you don't know. This is an allusion to, things going awry.
All right, so Of Mice and Men. It's about 2 guys, George and Lenny. They're migrant workers. They go from ranch to ranch. They stick together. George, supposed to be a smaller guy, has a good head on his shoulders, even described as clever to a certain extent, while maybe not being super smart. And then you have his polar opposite, which is Lenny, which is a big guy, strong guy, and quite frankly, he has a learning disability. He's not too bright. So when you pick up the story, they're at this pond,
A lake.
a lake. Yeah, it's probably better.
No, sorry, it's not even a lake, it's a river. They're at the side of the river Salinas.
And they just got done running away from the last thing Lenny got them in trouble from. And they're trying to start a new job in another city or at another ranch to have a new take on life apparently. And really their ultimate goal is not to work on the ranch. Their ultimate goal is to own a ranch. It seems to be the one thing that Lenny actually remembers at all.
Which kind of goes into, Lenny tends to only remember things that are repeated to him a lot. So through Lenny immediately going into this play back and forth, and you could really see it at the end of the book, he remembers George saying, "Oh, this is what I would do without you, Lenny, just as well." So, like, you can see, like, this happens often. Both Lenny gets scolded for doing something stupid, and then they go into the dream. It's all part of the same set piece to Lenny.
So they're going on to this new farm. And one of the key things that John wants to get across, on top of like the American dream and things such of that nature, is the loneliness that everyone seems to have. Everyone in the story, from Crux to Curly to Slim to even Lenny and George.
I'm not sure I'd consider Curly as part of the loneliness set piece.
Well, he's more of a bully, honestly.
Yeah.
But even still,
But like Crooks, Candy, George, Lenny is alienated. Lenny is a big speak on the loneliness, but that's also as a counterposition to Lenny having George. Now, I will say, before we get too far into the loneliness theme, he also likes to play about with the purity of nature versus the corruption of man. So like you get with the river scene in chapter one, it's a very beautiful setting, and he uses beautiful words to describe it. And then you get into chapter two, we're at the farm, and it's a more coarser description, and it immediately goes into like, Curly trying to find reasons to bully. So it's like it goes from like the purity of nature down to like man and his schemes. And that's a lesser theme. It's not really a theme as much as I believe just something John Steinbeck thought would be fun to put in there. As because loneliness is a major theme, like we've alluded. Most of the characters, including Curly's wife, have a reason to be lonely, and as a whole, all the migrant workers do.
And this also fits into historically right around this time. You see that as technology progressed on farms at this point, they didn't need as many workers. By some estimates, they only needed a third of the workers that they used to need, even essentially 7 years prior to when this book would have took place. So yeah, I think like everyone has less people that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Well, that and the work gets done quicker, so to speak. So like the transient worker isn't something that John Steinbeck made up. It's a model he observed. So the thing where they talk about they'll do the month's work and then just go to another farm, or they'll go to a farm for like a weekend so they can get dinner and then go to a different farm. That's a thing that would happen. I mean, you didn't just be employed at the same farm for like 5 years unless you're like Crooks who
Or Slim.
or yeah, Slim got employed there for a long time because of his skills. Crooks because he was good with horses, and I think because a horse kicked him, and that's why he's named Crooks.
That's
And
exactly
same
why it's
with
called
Candy. He lost a hand, so they're like, oh well, nobody else will employ you to be a swamper or whatever. There's no reason other people stay at a farm for a long time, so to speak.
Speaking of which, you know what a swamper is?
Well, they just clean bunkhouses.
I guess so. I thought it was like so. He's not a sweeper. They just call him a swamper.
I don't know. I just assumed it was like some illusion that like, oh, this bunkhouse
A
is so
janitor.
dirty, it's a swamp. It's swamping. I assume he does something with critter removal too, but
Yeah, okay.
I haven't really looked into what a swamper is fully. I just kind of contextually guessed at it.
I kind of just figured he's the local janitor around the
Yeah.
bunker and all that. Him and his old dog. Which let's
Yeah,
speak
poor
about
dog.
let's speak about the old dog, because this is also in a novella of this nature. Everything that's left in from chapter to chapter is important information.
I would like to argue that, but you are right.
So it's shown that. So talking about the old dog, It's shown that sometimes doing the cruel thing might be actually the respectful thing to do for the dog. The dog was so old that it was just constantly in pain. So it was argued that by putting it down, putting it out of its misery, is actually ultimately the good thing, which is a paradox.
And I would say, obviously Carson didn't suggest it. Carson is a mouthpiece for the cruelty of humanity just as much as Curly is. So, like, he's doing it because the dog stinks and he doesn't want to sleep in a bunkhouse that stinks. He even has to be reminded by Slim, who's seen by the compassionate one, to take a shovel to bury the dog so Candy doesn't have to see it. So, obviously, this isn't a compassion thing for Carlson. And when Candy is trying to get out of it, he even looks at Slim, who says, it would be better for society if the dog was put down, which will get partially into a theme I don't really want to glaze over, but I don't want to spend the entire discussion on. Whether intentionally or not, and I truly believe it was unintentional, because John Steinbeck does not really have any ties to this movement, this book has some eugenicist themes to it. I mean, like I just said, putting down the dog is better for society. So when you grow too old and disabled to contribute, it's best to just put you down. Same with, Lenny at the end of the book mimics the exact same way the dog was shot because he's too much trouble to take care of.
And Candy even expressed concerns that he was going to end up being put down because of his hand.
Yeah, exactly. So, kind of the same with Crooks, but we don't meet Crooks for long. And I think either intentionally or not, that's another statement piece on the African American role in all of this. Is he's delegated to such a side character who has the same concerns as the white man Candy. I mean, he's growing older, he's got a disability from this work, but he's also more isolated than Candy because he's not allowed to hang out with the other stable hands. So he has the same concerns, he's just not allowed to have the same dream as Candy, so to speak, because of his race. That's besides the point. So yeah, I would argue this book has eugenicist themes. I've done some research on John Steinbeck. Unless I missed something major in my thing, I guess I could scroll a Wikipedia article, but I don't think he has ties to the eugenicist movement. I just think that was a general American sentiment in the 1930s.
I think that had broader, not just an American sentiment. I mean, you got to think the Germans ended up just 20 years after this taking it to the extreme. So let's be honest. I can speak for myself. I personally don't agree with the idea of eugenics at all, period, end of discussion. I believe at a certain point you have to believe there is a inherent value in each person, regardless of how they were born or whatever life circumstances they are. And if you start from any other point, it can lead to bad consequences. But we're not talking about me personally. We're talking about Mice of Men. And I believe Bella agrees.
Yeah, of course. And I'm just going to get into the side point. It's a theming thing. They describe Lenny. I think Lenny is maybe the most othered person in the novel.
What do you mean by othered?
Well, I was going to explain that. He's othered by the narrative itself as opposed to Crooks, who's othered by the characters, because Lenny is constantly described in animal terms. Nobody else.
Pause.
Yeah, he's pause, lumbering. When he goes to pick up the mouse and he doesn't want George to know, he skittishes around like a terrier. He's constantly described in animal terms because they want you to think of him as less than human, which again plays into the eugenicist themes, but that's not fully the point. John Steinbeck wrote this with the theming of loneliness and the unachievability of the American dream, to me.
Which at that point, during the Great Depression, the American dream was seen as unachievable.
Yeah,
like owning land, like you wanted to be the landowner. And think about it, they were even talked about like one little plot, which was supposedly a good deal, $650. You work for an entire month for $50 a month, and that's not even including any other expenses you have to be. How long would it take you to earn that?
Well, I mean, they talk about it. The meals are free, the bunking is free. So the expensive is just entertainment. I think theoretically, like Candy saved up $300. It's technically possible.
He didn't save up $300. Remember, he got $250 for his hand being cut off.
Oh, okay, yeah.
He saved up $100 himself over his life, and I think They described him as an older gentleman, so he was further along in life. And then he got 250 for workers. I mean, which is a good thing that they gave him anything at all, and I guess keep him employed because I mean he expressed concern about not having a job later on because he doesn't have a hand and he is old. So
And to further the point of the unachievability of the American dream, they talk about like crooks when talking to Lenny and Candy before George comes back. I think this is chapter 4. He talks about how he's met plenty of people with this dream in their heads. He hasn't met a single one who's completed it. And part of that could be Crook's inherently alienated from the rest of the cast, but Crooks is also shown not to, I don't want to say thrive, because thrive makes it sound like it's his choice, but he's thriving in his alienation because he has no other choice. So he reads a lot. He does, a lot of stuff like that. He's bought himself reading glasses.
well, he even mentioned that being so isolated can give you weird thoughts, and without being able to talk to the guy next to you and be like, "Hey, do you think this is a good idea?" And then that person being like, "No, that's a dumb idea." I mean, Crux even mentioned like in the isolation, you can get thoughts, and you have no one there beside you to tell you whether those thoughts are good or bad.
Yeah. I just want to dive into the character of Crooks a little bit when I say like he says he's met plenty of people and he's read plenty of people with this dream and he knows in a narrative nobody ever achieves it.
And I think George actually also kind of inadvertently talks about this towards the beginning when he's talking about how easy of a life he could have. Like, oh, I could take my 50 a month and spend it all in a whorehouse at the end of every month. So many people end up, they could save that 650. And again, that was argued to be a good deal. So probably I imagine actually owning a ranch is probably much more expensive than that, but people end up getting tempted with the entertainment and other things and they spend their money.
Yeah, I don't want to make the puritanical argument here. Well, if you just buttered down and didn't have your avocado toast, you could own a house.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to go there either. I'm really not.
But I think it's interesting, and this is skipping ahead a little bit now that we're talking about, and I said this earlier, Lenny sees George's "This is what I'd do without you" and the discussion of the dream as one piece, which is showing us that George says that a lot. To Lenny, it's just a routine. So, like, when he's about to get shot, he's waiting for George to go into his, this is what I would do without you. I go to so many whorehouses. And George just goes, I'm not mad, because he realizes at that point he's going to have to live without Lenny. And he doesn't like that.
Oh, God, just thinking about it is already, like, welling up some emotion.
Yeah,
it's so sad.
Kind of want to cry a bit.
But can we talk about the writing style? And I think it's very interesting to bring up that if you notice in the writing style, it's a third person, but it's not omniscient, and we never actually get the inner thoughts of any character. So when they're describing, even at the end, like you can tell that George is very sad about what he's doing, but you never actually get an inner monologue.
Yeah, and it serves well because it describes the like the facial expressions, and it describes what they're doing. So like Curly's itching for a fight, but you don't hear Carly's in a monologue, I'm going to fight this big guy.
Yeah, and like George with his shaking hand with the pistol behind his back. I mean, it's just...
Yeah. And I think, now that we're discussing the end a little bit, I think it's part and parcel for the reflection of loneliness for this specific class of migrant worker that neither Curly nor Carlson understand why George is sad by this. Because they go, now what's gotten into them two? After Slim is like, let's go get a drink, buddy.
Yeah.
It's just showing that the bond that he and Lenny had was not unique, but close enough to be unique. It's very rare. And we see this through, I think, 3 separate people, if I remember correctly, question George his relationship with Lenny.
I mean, I remember for a fact that Slim did. He said it's very unusual to see.
Yeah, first we get Curly as part of... No, Curly's like second.
Was it Candy, I think? Candy was the first one?
No. It was the boss. When they get to the farm and he's like, are you just going to steal this guy's wages? He's worried. He's from the business perspective. And then we get Curly, who thinks they're sleeping together, as kind of a cruel joke on George. He obviously Probably doesn't, but he's looking for a chance to bully George because that's what he does. And then we have Slim who actually asks, and Lenny actually. It's the first person Lenny opens up to in a full way on.
You mean George opens up?
Yeah,
to?
sorry. It's the first person George opens up to in a full way on like, no, listen, I've had him like we've been together since we were kids. He's been traveling with me most of my adult life. I couldn't live without him. He couldn't live without me. And Slim understands. Slim is truly shown throughout the narrative to be the compassionate voice in all this.
And actually, that's the first point where we find out the trouble that Lenny actually causes George, too. I mean, in Weed, Lenny grabbed onto a woman, panicked, grabbed on tighter, and then when he finally let go of her, she accused him of rape, and then they got ran out of town. And George, essentially, that's implied to not be the first time. I'm not going to say that there were other incidents of that severity, but George has implied that there have been many other incidents where Lenny has gotten them as a duo in trouble.
There's not much I can expand about that. I mean, the whole narrative seems to, almost in a Shakespearean tone, tell you this is a tragedy. You just have to open your eyes to know this is a tragedy. And then it likes to play with your hopes. Like when Candy's like, oh, we could really do this. I have 350. And they're like, we could really do this. You understand at that point, and you don't want to, but you understand things will go wrong at that point.
And it's really sad because they only had to make it a month, but really the entire story takes place over 4 days. So if you think about it, from that moment, I think it's 2 days later where things go awry, and it breaks your heart.
And I don't know if the narrative's saying anything about this, but probably where Lenny accidentally commits murder is one of the few days George agrees, yeah, I could take a break and let Lenny do his own thing. And, he goes to town, he goes to the whorehouse, he gets a few shots in him before he comes back. He doesn't spend much of his money, but it's just like, this is the point in the narrative where George is doing what he said he would do without Lenny, and conversely, it shows you what Lenny would do without George, which is accidentally murder someone.
Absolutely heartbreaking. And they did it. They even kind of foreshadowed it when he killed the puppy.
Mm-hmm. They've been foreshadowing it since the mouse.
I mean, honestly, it's about mice and men, right?
Yeah. It just Lenny's childishness and his love for soft things has conspired against him. I mean, even if it went as far as he didn't have such a fear response of just freezing up, it wouldn't have happened. I mean, he would have just backed away and just like ran away or something. But no, he has a response to freeze up, and his gargantuan strength got him into trouble in that regard.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
I think I'm out of analysis. I've talked about, the Lenny George situation.
Do we want to talk about any other characters, such as Curly's wife, who doesn't even have a name?
Yeah, I think the narrative's very interesting in its pinning of Curly's wife. Obviously, I mean, for the first, 4 chapters, we get nothing about her except what other people say of her, including her name. She doesn't have one. She just has her narrative framing.
It's ironic, though, that she keeps talking about how she could have been an actress and all this in Hollywood, and we never even get to learn her name, which implies that she was never actually destined for any kind of fame to begin with, not that she deserved the ending that she had. That's the tragedy part.
Going back to John Steinbeck's writing, he writes this much like setting a stage play. I think this follows back into that in regards to she has no other place in the narrative except her role for pushing the narrative. So, that's why she doesn't have a name. She's just referenced as a plot device. She's there to piss off Curly. She's there to mislead Lenny. She's there to remind you of the racial injustice of America. She's there to this, that, and the other. She's not there to be a character. She's almost a divine force in the narrative in that regard.
Yeah. I mean, even pushing Lenny, tempting Lenny with the whole touch my hair thing is just like it ended up bad.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you feel bad for her. She's stuck in a loveless marriage from bad decisions.
She did it to piss off her mom.
Okay, other characters. We've talked about Crooks, his isolation from other characters, talked about Candy. Again, it just fucks me up that Slim is the compassionate voice in the story, and he's the one that says it's for the better of society about shooting his dog.
Very utilitarian life view.
Very
right?
eugenicist. Why is the compassionate voice the eugenicist
You gotta
in this
remember,
narrative?
you gotta remember, Slim is still a ranch hand. Like that's a tough group of people to be in. Like, I mean, you're talking about that. Like they were talking about how they all read these ranch magazines about men and cowboys and all this stuff, and try to, fantasize about doing that themselves. So this is the kind of people that we're talking about. So he can be compassionate in the form that they are.
He's largely a compassionate character, and I don't know what else to say other than that. I've gotten my thoughts out on Slim.
I think we can end it here.
Yeah. I think we've kind of gotten our thoughts out on this book. If you would leave a comment with your thoughts, we'd love to respond. Again, this is an open discussion as much as it is a discussion with us. We want to talk about our books next week?
Next week is Dracula, and what was the other one?
No, next week is Dorian Gray.
Well, yes.
No, sorry. Actually, this week is Dorian Gray. Next week, the short story we are publishing is Harrison Bergeron, I believe.
Yes.
And we will talk about
Dorian Gray.
We will talk about Dorian Gray next week in our discussion, along with Harrison Bergeron. That'll be our schedule for the most part, I think, where we just alternate talking novels and not.
A novel every other Saturday, and a short story every Thursday. And then we'll discuss the novel from the previous week. So you have a week to listen to the actual novel. So you can start listening to Dorian Gray now.
Yeah, we just didn't want to make you have to rush through the book so you could discuss with us. I thought it would be nicer if we gave a week, because Dorian Gray is long. Each chapter is like 30 minutes at least.
You can forgive a man for making something useful as long as he doesn't admire it. And you can forgive a man for making something useless as long as he admires it passionately. That is sentence. Oscar Wilde. Okay, we better stop. We're about to go into a Dorian Gray discussion right now.
We should add some more Oscar Wilde stuff. I know he's only written like Dorian Gray, and most of the other stuff is his plays. But I'm sure we could find a way to discuss a play properly.
Yeah.
We could also discuss De Profundis, but I don't want to.
I don't know what that is, but we'll discuss that more. Anyways, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Have a good day. Bye.